I've honestly never passed the Morris Center. I haven't struggled academically.
Fantastic.
I've, in fact, really enjoyed it and started to start my own journey to almost make up for lost time. I've taken my interest in performance and my love of performance in music, and I've started to gear towards becoming a voice actor, which is a full-time job of narration where words are what you face all the time. Difficult words are rewarded and difficult passages are rewarded. And that's quite simply not what I would have, that's not a path that was even an option for me had I not met you guys.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're having a great Friday, this beautiful weekend, wherever you're at. We're here for another episode of Dyslexia Success Stories. And today we have the unique privilege to talk to a man named Marcus Stadlmueller. And I met Marcus when he was 11, 12 years old. And today Marcus is 29. And he's going to talk to us today about his journey of learning difficulties, dyslexia, math struggles, some centric processing difficulties, and what happened when we took him to a transdisciplinary team called the Morris Center. So we're going to bring Marcus on and introduce him, and we'll have fun just helping explain what is Marcus's success story. Marcus, welcome aboard.
Happy to be here.
So just so the audience understands, it's been, last time I saw you was about 2000 and I think it was 12?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So like about 14 years ago, give or take a few in there. And you came to the Morris Center as a child, and I believe that was 2009 when you came into the clinic and we did these interventions. Tell the audience what you remember about how you ended up coming to the Morris Center and what kind of struggles that you were aware of.
Sure thing. Struggling with my dyslexia has been it's been a trajectory, and the trajectory went into a negative direction. I was able to tell that, but I wasn't able to tell what the reason was or why. All we knew was that my grades all of a sudden went from elementary and middle school grades, where I was making A's and B's, to C's and D's. And it wasn't until my mom and I started homeschooling and she realized that through a word problem, that I was simply rereading the same text prompt over and over again, but not actually retaining or being able to use any of that information. And that's what brought us to the Morris Center. We knew that we knew somebody else who had gone there before, and their kid had succeeded through the Morris Center. Mm-hmm. Kathy Kleinfelter, I believe, and her son TL, who now teaches at a university.
Nice.
And so that was good enough for us to hear. And based upon that, we decided to give you guys a shot, and we are so grateful that we did.
Well, and Marcus, you also have a unique background, and that's important for the audience to know, of being bilingual. You lived in Germany for a while, spoke German with the German schools, then came to the States as well. How do we know this just wasn't because it's bilingual and English wasn't your first language, or was English your first language and then you went to Germany?
German was my first language.
Okay.
And that was a part of the problem. We weren't sure because elementary and middle school, about the 6th grade, I believe, was when we were up to that point, we were in Germany. Then I had a car accident. And then shortly after that car accident, we moved to the States. Gotcha. So we weren't sure what was the issue. The car accident, I was physically mostly fine. I passed all the tests and all that good stuff. But because I didn't have many, because the physical trauma wasn't that great, right, they limited testing and were just willing to discharge me. And that was their priority, was to get me out of there and back into my life. So we didn't go into further panels or anything like that to try and determine what was going on. And then, we ended up in that nebulous situation in the States where all of a sudden my grades are not what they were before. We're not quite sure what it was. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a big factor was trying to determine, well, is it the language? But right. I had been reading English. Growing up, I read both children's books in German and English. I watched kids' TV in both German and English. Mm-hmm. I'd frequently come to the United States in the summers and had friends here. So it just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And again, it wasn't up until that word problem where we realized this is what's potentially the problem. Because I also loved math when I was in elementary and middle school.
And that's because you ended up being homeschooled and your mom was actually doing the instruction and could see you were struggling with the word problems. So what the Moore Center does, it takes a transdisciplinary approach. As we did a speech eval to look at your language skills. We did a occupational therapy eval to look at visual skills, motor skills with your hand, writing skills, visual memory skills, visual plus motor skills, all different levels of the motor system, because there's motor skills that are involved in academic success and life success too. And then we also did an extensive amount of academic testing. We look at your IQ, we look at your reading, spelling, writing, math, the whole 9 yards. And what's unique about the Moore Center is that it cross compares the data. You cross compare your language skills with your reading skills, with your visual skills, and try to figure out what lowest level or earliest building skills are not working efficiently. Because when you're trying to shore something up, it's better to go from the bottom up. Don't start. If your house doesn't have windows that close well and the doors don't close well, you can work on the windows and doors, but if you don't realize that actually the foundation is tilting on clay, and the cause of the problem is the foundation, not the windows or doors, it's a difference of treating symptoms versus addressing the causal factors. And in your eval, what we found was your phonological awareness was down around the 25th percentile. And that means your ability to perceive sounds, hold on to sounds, judge number of sounds in a word. Is there 3 sounds? Is there 5 sounds? Judge changes to sounds in words. And we measure 5 types of changes: adding sounds, omitting sounds, substituting sounds, reversing sounds, and repeating sounds. So you add, omit, substitute, shift, and repeat sounds. That's 5 important skills, because those are actually the 5 kinds of mistakes you can make in reading. You can add letters, you can leave out letters, you can substitute letters, you can reverse letters, but the letters just represent the sounds. And so if you can't judge the sounds, you don't even have the skill yet to know what letters go where and how they should be, which also affects spelling, which also could affect what we call phonological working memory, your ability to hold information in memory, store words, and retrieve words. And so you worked on those skills, and we worked on that phonological system and strengthened it to then strengthen reading and spelling. We then worked on your mental imagery skills. Can you make movies of what you're reading and picture what you're reading as well, so that the word problems from math actually just kind of move in your head and you can see what the problem was talking about, conceptualize it, and use that imagery to think about. And you also did some work with math and some writing work as well. And remarkably, Marcus, I don't think you remembered, but it only took 8 weeks. So it was just 8 weeks of time that we put you in that practice. So hello to Marlon. Marlon's in Trinidad. He's jumping in and saying hello and bless the work that we're doing. So tell us what you remember about doing the work you did at the Moore Center. What do you remember that you actually did? And I know we just touched base a little bit just before we jumped online. Many adults your age, when it's been, gosh, what do we say? It's 2009. Yeah, so it's been 15 years since you went to the Moore Center. Many adults your age have completely forgotten exactly what they did or exactly why they were there. Is that true for you, or do you remember everything that happened?
That is definitely true for me. The main thing that I remember is that I was tired at the end of every day. Gotcha. And that we did a bunch of, when you don't understand it as a kid, it's just doing a bunch of strange things. You're playing with blocks, you're looking at different faces and playing with sounds. So it really doesn't feel, going through it doesn't feel like much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the end's definitely, you can tell what's happening by the end of it. You can tell your progress midway through and all of that stuff, all of that. You can also definitely tell that you are doing the work because you are tired. You're processing information, and it is fatiguing.
Yeah, and let's explain to the viewers what doing the work means. It means you are coming 6 hours a day, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. You're doing 6 one-on-one sessions per day. Each session lasts about 45, 50 minutes. And then you take about a 5-6 minute activity break with the other students who are there. And some students will be younger than you. Some would be 20 or 30 year olds older than you. And they go out and just take an activity break on the, in the garden area, the basketball court, something like that. And then come back in and start session number 2, 45, 50 minutes, back out for an activity break. Back in for session 3, 45, 50 minutes, but we alternate what you're doing in the session. So the first session might be occupational therapy, and they're working on some foundational fine motor skills, sensory motor skills, visual perceptual skills. And then you take the activity break and come back for session 2. But now you're in that now foundations for speech, language, reading, and spelling program. You're working that phonological system for 45 minutes through a series of very well-structured, very well-studied activities. And then it's back out for the activity break. Come back in session 3, might be a second occupational therapy session. And they're building on what you did in the first session, but they're moving on to the other activities and they're reinforcing and strengthening those skills. And you keep going back and forth like that throughout the whole 6 hours of the day. And so it can be quite exhausting because you're doing a lot of brain processing. There's a lot of, because you're one-on-one. There's nobody else giving the answers. It's all you and the instructor you're working with.
Yep.
So with that in mind, you work through those skills. You got, skills stronger. Do you have any early recollections of what school's like after you left the Morris Center? Did you stay in home school? Did you go back to, public school? Did you go to private school? What happened next?
Sure thing. So I went to public school directly after that. And I remember it being easier. I remember certainly something that was a challenge for me was that even though I now had different skills and I was able to read, I had built up a sort of a complex about reading, like a sort of, this is not for me, the other kids read, I don't read kind of thing.
Right.
And I could always read technical things, and I'm a musician, so I was able to read words in a song or something like that and be able to process that. But when it came to longer narrative type information, books, for example, my whole family reads, I was just never the reader. And afterward, it started to change. I started to be able to participate. I didn't need as much help through assignments in school where we were evaluating longer passages or had to do writing. I definitely still needed help to get me going, but that started to snowball after a while. Yeah. And that's where we could really tell was that the progress started to take off. We didn't just keep running into the same wall. And it's frustrating too for a family. Yeah. You get into this position. And for me specifically, I was the strange thing was that I was able to read the language, but so it sounded great to a teacher, but there was just no processing of that information.
Right. It should be like the content, the comprehension side of it.
Exactly. Gotcha. Or being able to use that information, like the word problem, being able to then use different aspects of that, evaluate different aspects of the word problem and make meaning of it.
Right. Exactly. Well, and when we understand how the brain works, we know that language literacy skills are a left side functional system. Further back, there's comprehension systems. And I spent 10 years doing stroke rehab research with adults who lost their reading skills or lost their spelling skills, or they were severely impaired in those skills after a brain injury called a stroke. It causes brain tissue to die. And we found that if the damage is further up towards the front, just back from your eye, you'll lose either your ability to sound out words or your ability to memorize sight words, or if the damage is really big, you might lose some of both. But if it doesn't actually extend back here, it doesn't really affect your comprehension. Your comprehension stays strong. But if the reverse happens and the damage is in the back side of the brain and not up here on the left side, then you see the reversed outcome. You see the reading and spelling skills are just fine, but now the person has lost their comprehension ability. They can't understand what you're saying. They can't understand what they're reading. And so we know that the brain has this left-sided language network, and there are different parts doing different things, and you want to make sure they're equally strong and working together. So I think one really important point for the audience that you just made was when you went back to school, you found things easier. And it wasn't that we gave you new accommodations. It wasn't that we asked the school to give you simpler books. It wasn't that we actually asked the school to ask you to spell fewer words. There's a difference between accommodating, supporting, and working around a deficit versus what you did is it's to take those lower skills, empower them, and make them stronger so you don't struggle. You don't need those accommodations or those supports or that kind of help. And Marcus, frankly, even today, most adults don't know that's even possible. They have many folks who in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and their dyslexia never got any better. Their reading never improved no matter what they did. And they've come to the viewpoint that their brain can't change. It's wired differently. It's never capable of learning. And so they've worked on building other skills like mental imagery. Because they can't read well, they listen and they make movies really well. They practice that a lot. And some people mistakenly think that that's a outcome of dyslexia. Everyone with dyslexia has better mental imagery skills. But that's not quite true, because it wasn't in a genetic endowment. They didn't genetically just have better imagery skills. It's something that they built over time by practicing it. And so that's how the brain works for any skill. If you want to be the best go-kart racer, you want to be the best mountain bike racer, you want to be the best, oboe player, it takes a lot of practice. You want to be the best opera singer, it takes a lot of practice. And that's the practice. Scientifically, Marcus, we call that experience-dependent neuroplasticity. If you don't get the right experiences, the neurons aren't going to build the right wiring, and you're not going to get the skills you're trying to get. So it's all about that practice, all about that skill. So I think your point that you made was you didn't need a lot of supports. You might have needed some prompting. And that, I don't know if you've heard this term before, we'd call that there's some learned helplessness going on there, or some learned expectations of, I'm not a reader. And you just kind of use that to, okay, you know what? I'm not a reader. That's not me. But even though the testing doesn't agree anymore, because when we repeated your testing, we saw that your reading speed, meaning how quickly could you read passages, went from the 16th percentile to the 50th percentile in those 8 weeks of training. So we had drastically changed that reading rate. And again, that was only in 8 weeks' time. And I just mentioned to you, and it's probably the first time you've heard this, and that was a phenomenally short amount of treatment. We typically don't have students coming to the Moore Center for 8 weeks. Typically, it's going to take a lot more than just 2 months of intensive instruction. So in 2 months, you blew through several of our programs. And partly we say that's attributable to not as severe deficits and high IQ, high potential. So we knew your IQ is in the 85th to 90th percentile. That's top 10, top 15 compared to peers your age. But IQ is not a guarantee. It's what you do with it that matters. And it's what systems help support it that matters as well. So you change those reading fluency skills. Your ability just to memorize words, it was actually quite strong. You memorized words really well. Your ability to read a memorized word was a 78th percentile. Mm. You had a bunch of memorized words, but you wouldn't always catch yourself if you flipped 2 words and you changed one real word for another real word, because they look a lot alike. Like though versus through. You might read though for through, you might read through for though. There's only one letter difference in those 2 words. So even though it wasn't a major part of the treatment program, we still measured it because you had done a bunch of work with OTs, strengthening your visual perception, visual memory, which helps the brain store those memorized words of the parts of English that you can't sound out. You cannot sound out yacht and read it properly. You'd say ya, you say yachita, and that's not how we say it. So many words in English, you can't sound them out. They have to be memorized. And your ability to memorize words, your knowledge of memorized words, let me say that again. The number of words you could read in the beginning was 78th percentile. Marcus, when we finished 8 weeks later, you were at 99.6 percentile. You're in the top 0.4% of kids your age in terms of how well you are memorizing and storing those words in a rock solid way. And we'd say that happened because you worked with OT to change part of that occipital lobe function of visual memory, visual perception. And that's why OT is so important for some kids who have learning disabilities. And then we changed your phonological process, and that's your ability to hold on to a word, split it apart, judge the number of sounds, judge the order of sounds, which one's first, second, third, and judge those 5 changes. And those 2 systems together mean you're going to be more likely to recognize a word, store a word, retrieve a word, and remember what it looks like at the same time.
Okay.
So, did you have any idea that you made all those changes when you're a young man of age 11 or 12?
At the time, not at all. But retroactively looking back at it, yes. And certain things that I remember, because I'm a musician, is that one of my skills has always been that I was able to keep when I'm in the context of a song, I'm able to perform and make the performance parsimonious, where you're not able to notice that I'm making a mistake. That became a problem when I started to get into high school, because now I was competing, and now there were people who knew the pieces that I was singing, and they knew the words word for word. So I couldn't make those substitutions.
Yes. Had to be spot on. Had to be accurate.
Exactly. So I started to realize a difference, certainly after the Moore Center, and certainly through this training.
And so, just to jump ahead, because I think it's just fascinating to hear this piece of your life today, is what did you do with all those skills? Because when you came to the Moore Center, we already knew that you were a musical prodigy. You had tremendous musical skills. You played in the 2 different symphonies, I think, as a child. I can't remember what instrument were you playing back then?
So I was an oboist. I played the saxophone. That's really where I started, but piano, saxophone, oboe, and I've added a couple other ones as well. And I sing.
Gotcha. And where have you taken that musical skill today?
Sure thing. So in college, I became an opera singer and studied 4 languages, which would not have been a possibility or would have been much more difficult before this training.
And when you say studied 4 languages, let me clarify. You learned how to speak Italian and read Italian?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and pronounce it in a sung way through International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, which actually I didn't realize. It makes sense now. When we started to approach IPA, my peers were struggling to pick up those skills, but I had them in place, and it clicked right now that it makes sense. I was working on the code before because I was just like, oh yeah, let's sound it out. And I was able to coach my peers.
Because you had been trained with expert level sounding out skills. And it then gave you this opportunity then to pursue opera in foreign languages. Because most people who have a history of dyslexia are not going to pursue foreign language. And the reason being is they struggle to perceive the sounds in English word, their native language. They struggle to sound out words in English, and let alone some new set of letters with sets of sounds that are completely different than English that they've never heard of. They're like, that I'm still working on English. I'm not going to take Spanish. I'm not going to do German. I'm certainly not going to do Russian or some of these words that are really hard to sound out. But yet you could do it, and we would say, here's the brain reason why. Just like you could remember more of those sight words, well, the real test of that visual and that phonological system is spelling. And when you came to the Moore Center, your spelling was at the 36th percentile. It's still average, but let's keep in mind, but your IQ was at the 85th to 90th percentile, top 10, top 15. So there's no point in having almost 50-percentile point gap in your spelling and your potential. That means that'd be like having a Ferrari and that motor's running only on 2 cylinders and it's got the power of a Pinto or a Yugo or a smart car. It's like, well, what's the point of that? This is a Ferrari motor. It's like, yeah, but it's not tuned properly and it's not firing on all cylinders. So we tell younger kids many times, we are brain coaches. We're not educators. We're not, trying to teach you a content. We're brain coaches. We know how to actually tune up that brain and improve the efficiency of that wiring, which is what everybody does when you learn a new skill. As you became a better and better oboist, you enhanced the efficiency of the wiring needed to finger that instrument, to perceive the tones of what you're playing, to read the music at the same time. And the more you practice it, the more those cylinders are firing and that brain power gets stronger and stronger. So we saw your same changes happen with spelling to go from 36th to 72nd percentile, which means you not only would be able to recognize a foreign language and better read it, but you actually be better able to spell it and write it down, which for those who don't know, the International Phonetic Alphabet, typical English language has about 42 sounds and so many letters that make those sounds. But International Phonetic Alphabet has, I can't remember the numbers, like 100 little demarcation markings as a way to help measure fine grain changes in speech sounds. So it's even, just think of it as a far more complicated English letter system. But it's really not letters, it's little dots and squiggles and all kinds of funny symbols that you now have the skills to memorize and actually be able to sing in Italian.
Yep.
And what did your peers think of that?
As well.
I'm sorry?
And able to learn that language as well, and able to coach my peers.
Gotcha.
Because I just had skills that they didn't have, and I was able to use my new strengths and the tools that you guys provided me with to help my peers.
Phenomenal. And that's why part of the message we have in these dyslexia success stories is adults like you who went through a program that didn't help you compensate for your dyslexia. It didn't just try to drill you and drill you and drill you with phonics, which is going from letters down to sound. It used a neurodevelopmental multisensory approach to build up those brain processors that sounds are part visual, sounds are part acoustic, and sounds are part oral tactile, which is touch, and oral kinesthetic, which is movement. So if I just do this and I'd say, acoustically, they sound a lot alike. And it's harder for some people to tell, did I make the same sound twice? Did I make, did I make one sound twice? Did I make two different sounds? But if I add visual to the acoustic and I go, people are like, oh, F and TH. I can tell now exactly. Those are completely different. And so the phenomenon is, Marcus, guess what age a person who's not going to struggle with reading is going to start looking at their mom and dad's mouth to figure out the sounds that their mom and dad are making? How young do you think they are when they start using their eyes to look at the parent's mouth?
Oh my goodness.
Somebody did a really cool laser eye tracking study. Let me just put it that way. We have the science. We know what happened.
Okay. I feel like pretty much immediately, right? Kids watch everything we do.
They do. They pick it up. But what we know from science is at least by 8 months of age, babies shift from looking at your eyes to looking at your mouth. They're watching how your mouth is moving. They're watching what it's doing. And what do babies usually do around 8 months of age? For most of them, about 70% or so, they start babbling and they start moving their mouth. And they're trying to get their mouth to do what they see your mouth doing. Because we have these theoretical things called mirror neurons, where by watching your mouth move, their motor cortex for the mouth controls up here, and it's firing away, and part of it over here, and it's firing away. Just by watching you move, the brain thinks that you're going to try to do it. So it's kind of trying to map and remember how those movements look so it can actually execute those movements. And here's what parents do. They'll say to you, they'll say, Marcus, this is a ball. And if you go ba, they'll be like, no, son, it's a ball. And you keep saying ba, and you're like, they're not going to shout it louder in your ear. It's not a auditory perception problem. It's not a hearing problem. You can hear exactly what they're saying, but you're not perceiving all the sounds of what they're saying. So guess what most parents do to help you say the word? They go, son, it's a ball. And they draw it out and they get their mouth closer to you and they make their mouth bigger. And it's like, who taught you to do that? Most parents are like, I don't know. And the actual phenomenon is, well, their parents did, because that's how their parents helped to teach them how to move your mouth, how to make the sounds, how to say the sounds. And so for most folks who have strong literacy skills, they'll innately just do that with their own kids. Build that multisensory wiring system to build those skills.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So how else has life been for you since dyslexia? Because most people with dyslexia, it's supposed to be a life of struggle and not much academic success. Did you make it through college?
Certainly. 3.5 GPA. I did very well academically. I've honestly never passed the Moore Center. I haven't struggled academically. Fantastic. I've in fact really enjoyed it and started to start my own journey to almost make up for lost time. I've taken my interest in performance and my love of performance in music, and I've started to gear towards becoming a voice actor, which is a full-time job of narration where words are what you face all the time. Difficult words are rewarded and difficult passages are rewarded. And that's quite simply not what I would have, that's not a path that was even an option for me had I not met you guys.
Fantastic. And so guess what you're at risk for when you have kids?
What's that?
A child with dyslexia. Because what do we know about dyslexia, Marcus? It's genetic. It runs in families, which means you basically get to blame your mom or your dad. One of them has some history in their family. Either, dad, and it may not be them directly. It may be like it was dad's brother who couldn't spell, or mom's sister wasn't, quote, college material. And there, or was, dad's never been a great speller, so he became an engineer because they don't do a lot of spelling in engineering. And then parents tend to have picked professions that shied away from those weaker skills.
That makes sense.
Problem is today's world has so much reading, so much language, so much that you're going to shortchange yourself if you try to only play to your strengths. You will not have as many opportunities as if you take your weaker skills and make them stronger. And I think you're a prime example of that. So what degree did you choose to pursue, and why? Why that one?
Voice performance and opera. And because I love performing. I love connecting with people. Nice. And I realized that I had a talent, and I did play to my strengths in that way. Mm-hmm. But I also loved that it was a language degree, and there's languages in my past as well. My folks are speak 4 languages plus. Wow. My dad speaks 5, 6, and that was something that I was interested in, and I was able to combine all of those things into a degree program. And thanks to my skills, I was actually able to tackle it.
Fantastic.
And now I love doing things that I didn't love to do before, which is read very dry material to get information to then teach others and break it down for others. And that's what I'm choosing to do with my career track now as a voice actor.
Gotcha. Well, because I brought up the piece about your future, and if you have children, what to be aware of, let me throw out to the audience 2 pieces of very important information. Here's how you tell if your child's going to have dyslexia or not. Because you can actually do this at age 4. It's a real simple activity. We go around teaching pediatricians to do this. This is the #1 predictor of dyslexia at age 4, and it works worldwide in any language. Basically, what you do is you say a word like cat. You ask the child to say it back to you. You say, Johnny, say cat. And Johnny goes, cat. Say, now, Johnny, I want you to do it again, but I want you to change it. Say cat, but don't say, leave that off. And the 4-year-old who immediately just goes at is not going to struggle to read and spell. Mm-hmm. You can say flame, get Johnny to say flame. Now you say flame, but don't say the old sound. And the 4-year-old who's going to be a strong reader and speller, almost millisecond speed, Marcus, just goes fame. Or you say baseball, Johnny says baseball. You say, now say baseball, but don't say base. And Johnny says ball. So it's basically that skill that you had that made it so easy to learn the International Phonetic Alphabet. Oh yeah, that's this sound, that's this sound, that's this sound. You could combine, judge, perceive, manipulate sounds so easily and effortlessly. That is the foundational language processing skill every brain needs to be able to be fully skilled in literacy skills of reading and spelling and writing. And the sooner we build that system, the sooner you're going to utilize it and make it stronger and build those other skills as well. So that's where the predictor goes. Now, what my teams have done, because I employ about 250 people. We have a Moore Center clinic in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, which is just east of Jacksonville. We have a Moore Center clinic in Ocala, Florida. We have a Moore Center clinic in the Caribbean, in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. But many people can't get to those clinics. And frankly, and thankfully, many people don't need all those healthcare experts because they're not that severe. They just need something to boost their reading skills, or they need to change spelling skills, or they need to change comprehension skills. So then we built an online ed tech company called Now Programs. And nowprograms.com offers instructional services around the world, online, person to person. We can do exactly what you did at the clinic, Marcus. We can do it online, anywhere in the world. And we've got hundreds of students online simultaneously every day. And when I say students, notice I didn't say children. I said students, because our students range online in age of 5. And guess what our oldest student has been online to date? How old is it?
65, 68?
74.
Wow.
This gentleman was 74. Wow. And he'd always struggled to spell. Reading had never been strong for him. He'd always avoided it, worked around it, but had become very successful in his business and what he chose to do, or his career, because some of these folks were engineers and they weren't entrepreneurs, but they were engineers or other professions or architects. But it really still bothered him at age 74, even though he's retired, that he couldn't sound out words. And so he chose to go online, and from the privacy of his home office, he rebuilt all his skills at age 74.
That's tremendous.
It is. Fundamentally phenomenal part of the brain is the brain's ability to rewire, its ability to learn, never goes away. It's lifelong.
Wow.
So here's another plug to help people who are watching us today know there's other ways to get help and empower these skills. Is we've now built the world's very first, what we call evidence-based method, converted into an app. And this app is uniquely and a little bit humorously named Lip Letter Land. And it's targeted right now just for 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. And Lip Letter Land will go in and do what you did in the clinic, but the app will do it with you right there on the iPad or right there on the iPhone. The Android's coming soon, but you always launch Apple first and work out a few bugs, and then you duplicate it in Android. And we've got it at the really rock bottom price of $6.99 a month. But it gets even better, Marcus. And I'm going to sound now like a late night TV commercial. It's even better.
There's more.
Because from that one app, you actually can have 4 kids on that device using the app separately. Each can be signed in under their own name. They can use it, build their own skills. So you're basically paying $1.75 a month for each of your 4 kids to rebuild those skills.
That's tremendous.
So we're bringing technology to help make this more available, because we want folks like you who had dyslexia, may have had to be on a trajectory to work around it and not pursue something you wanted to pursue because you didn't have the reading skills, or not pursue music because you couldn't remember the Italian words. That'd be horrible, because if that's where your skills are, that's where your strengths are. We want to empower everybody with more strengths so they've got more opportunities to do more things. So your kids, they might be playing this Lip Letterland app.
Well, I know where to go.
There you go. Exactly. And we jokingly say, too, because the name's just kind of a quirky name, you say, if your kid can't say the app and he calls it Whip Wetterland, they definitely need the app for sure. Because we've got to work on that motor skill, the articulation, the phonological piece, that visual, and rebuild that whole system together and get it stronger. So I know before you came on the podcast, you were like, gosh, I'm not going to remember what to talk about. I don't even know what even happened to that Moore Center clinic. And you had a sit down and kind of chat with your mom a little bit. Mm-hmm. Anything your mom shared that was something you had forgotten or that you didn't remember had happened through these years growing up with struggles?
Growing up with struggles. I mean, yeah, the main piece was the word problem, was the issue with the word problems and the bizarre not being able to read and read perfectly well, but not comprehending that information. Yeah. And just the road that it took to find that, because that was probably already happening after the accident while I was in school. But because it wasn't my mom and it was a teacher, all that we were getting back was, he's not doing well with this concept.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until we were able to really put it under the microscope that we were able to find that. That was the biggest thing that came out of talking about the Morris Center and figuring out, remembering how we got where we are now.
Right, how that even happened.
Exactly.
And one thing we've not discussed, the audience can know more about it, is the car accident. I mean, clearly you weren't driving because you were about 9, I think, at the time. Mm-hmm. So what was the car accident and what happened?
Sure. So I was on inline skates and I was crossing a road. And as I'm crossing the road, I was hit by a car who was running a red light.
Oh, my gosh.
And it makes sense in retrospect that I would have come out with some injuries. My body was okay, but what we knew from the accident report was that my head struck the windshield of the car several times before I actually went down on the ground.
Wow.
So then it makes sense.
Yeah, we'd call that a closed head injury. And
Mm-hmm.
even if they put you in an MRI machine, the MRI may not show any injury to brain tissue whatsoever, but there's things that MRI can't see. They call them shearing and tearing injuries. They're just small loss of some of the fibers get twisted or mixed up. And so these shearing and tearing injuries affect your ability to attend, and they also can affect memory. So they're not brain damage, but they interfere with the efficiency of the wiring. So what may have happened in your case was that closed head injury decreased your attentional focus skills, and you also had a diagnosis of ADHD from the Morris Center, and even before that.
Yep.
And it may have decreased a little bit of your memory skills. And those two together decreasing may have heightened some of your learning struggles that, because you were so smart, you'd always worked around them pretty well because you had a top 10, top 15 kind of IQ. But when you take away some of your basic functional skills, like how well you focus and how well you can use memory, that kind of makes it more evident that, hey, there's some word struggles. There's some skills that really aren't at the same level that you want your skills to be. And so that may have been part of the factor, but we wouldn't attribute your dyslexia to the injury itself because there was no evidence of brain damage.
Sure.
Now, if there was, I'm the guy who spent 10 years working with people who got reading problems from brain damage. We don't call that dyslexia. We have a different name for that. That's called phonological alexia. It means it's an acquired reading problem. So that's why it's called alexia, A standing for acquired, lex meaning words, it's acquired word problem. Dys for dyslexia is difficulty, but it's also developmental difficulty with letters. And that's the genetic piece as well. Okay. Is there any family history in either mom or dad's side of anybody who's not a great speller, not a great reader, or had any of these struggles and chose a path that's not an academic path because they were not college material? Because in your parents' age and their, their parents' age, nobody really called it dyslexia back then. It just said, yeah, college is not for you, or school is not for you.
Yep. It would probably be my grandma on my mom's side.
Okay.
She was a brilliant woman, but she always would repeat the phrase that you guys are smart, I'm not smart, even though she was a computer programmer back in the early days when the computer still took up, the whole room.
Wow.
And she was able to work through complex problems, and she just never gave herself the credit for that. And it was because other folks had told her that you're not good at this, so find something else.
Interesting.
Common line.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important too, that we not only identify your strengths and your skills, but we also empower people to know you can change them. These skills can be changed. And if you're not a great, mathematician, but you want to use math skills, then keep working at it. We say there's only one guarantee in learning, and it also applies to neuro rehab of rebuilding skills to the brain after injury. There's one guarantee. Don't work on it, and it's not going to get better. That's the only guarantee.
Yep. That makes sense.
So what's happening for you next? Where's the next 5 years going to take you? Where's the next 10 years going to take you? Because this is really an important point, because you have the opportunity to choose what you do with it. It's not that you're limited and you say, well, I'm going to go this way because I can't do this, this, and this. So I have to avoid these professions or avoid these, career choices. You've got wide open opportunities based on what you've already done. And with all the skills you have, you've got the opportunity to pursue most anything you want to pursue. Where do you see that going? Have you thought that far down the road?
For sure. Futures always change. But the thing that I'm really digging into is voice acting. And it's because I love it. It combines a lot of things that I love, which is connecting people, being able to reach people where they're at, and connecting them to ideas that they had not considered. Just because the voice that is telling the story matters a lot.
Right.
It's the difference between connecting to the information or not, and that's very interesting to me because it matters how you hear things.
Exactly.
And I have the training from my performance side, and I'm planning to utilize that to become the best voice actor I can be, and then leverage that into a full performing career.
Fantastic.
As an opera singer, I had one of my biggest triumphs as an opera singer was that I was able to perform 3.5 hours of fully memorized Italian opera. And I performed it. It was rehearsed, it was performed, and it was a good performance. Wow. By all means. And that's just something that would have been much more difficult or probably impossible had I not met you guys.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you got to choose what you want to do. I can't imagine singing 3 hours of Italian. That just mind blowing to me. That's not where my strength is right yet.
The wise man said, takes just practice, right?
Exactly, 100%. It could be if that's where I want to put the time and energy. But I think that's just a fascinating story, Marcus, as you took it in that direction. And your points about voice, I think people will really relate to, because there's certain things people like to listen to Morgan Freeman narrate. There's certain things that people like to listen to, James Earl Jones, narrate on National Geographic shows. Or the current one I think is hilarious that you might end up doing is there's a sleep app.
Yep.
Matthew McConaughey is the voice of the sleep app. And I saw a video conference between a couple celebrities, and one guy looks at me and goes, my wife and I fall asleep to you every night. It was Michael Bublé. Michael Bublé was talking and Matthew McConaughey said, well, thank you, and there's just certain things about that voice that communicates and connects with us and touches us in certain ways. So I think that's a fascinating career choice, and you've got the opportunity to do it. last question for you is advice that you would give others who haven't had the opportunities you had, and they're still struggling with reading, and they're adults, or they've got a 10-year-old who's struggling with reading and spelling. What is your advice that they could be doing or they could be pursuing to give themselves, if it's the adult, or their child, if it's their kid, the best choices, the best opportunities? How would you suggest they take that on?
Sure. Honestly, be kind to yourself and don't count yourself out. Just because you're not good at something now does not mean that you can't be good at something in the future. Oftentimes it really does. Things that we think are just innate talents have been developed over just a long period of time in ways that we don't fully understand. And not counting yourself out and believing in yourself and being able to, if there's a problem, we find a tool, and we find a tool to get you there. And that's, in my experience, that has proven true time and time again. And that's how I am where I'm at now.
100%. I think it's that's a great take-home message, Marcus. And I'll add to that to say, and you're a prime example of a dyslexia success story because you've changed weaker skills into strengths. You built more strengths, even though it was at the impetus of your mother's decision to get you to the Morris Center and to use those now programs to build those phonological skills, reading. But you did it, and it actually can be done because many people don't think that these kind of skills can be done. They don't think that you can actually make changes to those skills and put them into strengths and new strengths. But like your story and many of the other stories of the adults and the kids we've talked to, we're trying to help change that expectation that you can change these skills. They can be strengthened, and it doesn't take years because Marcus, you did it in 8 weeks, 8 weeks of empowerment, and it's been a lifetime of use and strength ever since. So congratulations, and thank you for sharing your dyslexia success story with us today. And I have to end with one piece. Can you give us just a little bit of opera? We just like to hear a little bit because that's just fascinating.
I am on a webcam, so I will probably do that. So I'll back up.
Okay. Wow, Marcus, that's phenomenal. You're right. The webcam mic cannot handle that.
Too much gain.
That's it. Thanks again. Have a great time and keep in touch. We'd like to hear what happens in the next 5 years or 10 years. And like I said, if you're ever by the clinic, come in. We'll test your skills just for fun to see where they're at today, 15 years after you did remediation and empowered those skills.
Certainly.
Next time, folks, we'll see you in 2 weeks for another dyslexia success story. Next week, we'll be online at 5 p.m. with a dyslexia discussion with Stephen Yearout and myself, talking about some other pertinent topics about learning difficulties and how to help empower skills. Till then, have a great weekend. Thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you later.